All right, well, happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're super lucky to have a presentation today from my colleague Eden Klein, who is an attorney at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. This is the LSC funded legal aid serving 68 counties in South and West Texas. Um, yeah, and this is our second to last meeting of the year. As I noted in my email, in December, we're kind of having a more informal kind of closeout to the year. We don't have a speaker, so it'll just be a time people can share projects they've been working on. You can talk about it, or if you want to kind of visually share your screen and show any dashboards or things you've been working on with the group. It will not be recorded, so it's just kind of an open time for that. And also to talk about what we've liked from this group this year and what folks would like to see in the future and kind of thinking into the next year. So, yeah. Alrighty. Eden, I'm kind of getting ready to turn it over to you, but just want to check if you try to share your screen, I think it might send a request that then we can grant.
Yeah, I can do it now.
Perfect.
Cool.
Awesome.
I'll go ahead and share my screen then. And then you let me know when you want me to get started.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everybody. So my name is Eden Klein. I'm an attorney with Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, but I also have a great interest in data and math and science in that way, and it's been really exciting to apply that with the law. So I'll give you a little explanation of how I came to do that and what we're going to look at today. But today we're focusing on a database that I created on legal deserts in Texas. So let's go ahead and get started with that. All right. So Eden Klein, I'm also focusing on CPS defense work, domestic violence work, foster youth work, and expulsion. So if you have any other questions about that, feel free to contact me in the future to help out with that. So legal deserts in Texas, we know it's a problem. But I don't think that the commission, at least the Texas Access Justice Commission, was aware as how big that problem was until last year when we put together this database. So some history on what we're going to be looking at. So last year, in the beginning of the year, I was contacted by Bruce Bauer to sit down and talk about my perspective on rural Texas and practicing in rural Texas. I'm from El Paso. I practiced in El Paso for 5 years. I just moved back. I just moved to Dallas, but I am still focusing on taking cases in the more rural areas of Texas. So Bruce and I spoke for quite some time about my lived experience with that and growing up on the border and growing up low income and without an attorney family and what that looked like. And that then turned into being invited onto a working group for the Texas Access to Justice Commission. And our focus was on rural areas and legal deserts. And on that commission with me were some incredibly qualified people. There was Judge Ferguson out of West Texas. There was Dr. Keegan Warren, who works at A&M. There was Kevin Dietz, and a few other people that were incredibly knowledgeable about these issues. So we were sitting and trying to come up with strategic plans on how to help rural Texans. But as we were talking, everyone was talking about their lived experiences, which is really important data, but nobody had numbers. There was no automatic, hey, this county needs this much help and this county's here. And so I decided to just try and build that because I noticed we didn't have that for Texas. And so I contacted various groups to start data collecting and creating a whole entire database. And I'll show you guys the database in a minute. And this helped inform our proposal to the commission, which then, gives their different recommendations and whatnot to the Supreme Court. And Judge Ferguson took this database to the commission when they were talking about permanent committees for the future. And apparently, he told me this database is the reason why they've now created a permanent working group on legal deserts. So Judge Ferguson and Pablo, I can't fully remember his last name, but it's Almaguerde, I think that's how you say it. He and him are now the co-chairs, or I guess the chairs, and I'm the vice chair of this now working group. And so we are actually in the process of building it. We're waiting for the okay from the commission to get started on that group. We've contacted judges throughout the state of Texas to start helping this initiative, but it's something we're really excited to start on. But what I'm focusing on to talk to you guys today about is the data collection, this database in itself, and different ways that we can analyze this data. One of the great benefits that have been from presenting this data, I've presented it at Poverty Law Conference, at the Family Law Task Force and a couple other places, is I've gotten great feedback each time from people who've practiced in these areas or practiced with data on how to better this data or what I can add or what I can change. And so I really welcome feedback from you all as this presentation goes on in the chat or at the end. Because, the goal is one that well, I'll tell you what the goal is. The goal is to create a public database and I want it to be public, right? I feel like, this data isn't data that I didn't go into these counties and collect this data. This is data that's available, but it's not readily available and it's not public interfacing. And I think it's really important that that happens. And later on, I'll show you some databases that are far more sophisticated than mine that are publicly available. And I would love to see this happen in that way. But when I created this database, my goal was one, to be public, and two, to display various problem areas. So I'll show you the columns of that. And I wanted to emphasize what counties were in critical condition. Now, the phrasing critical condition, actually, Mary sent me a great email. We were talking about the use of language and data. And I think I would really open up to people helping me label this data and talk about it, because what I'd originally put was emphasizes what counties are dying. And Mary brought up a really great point about how that language changes the way that we treat those places and the way that we either go to them for help or leave them alone, right? And so I changed it to critical condition because I feel like when you hear critical condition, it can still be safe. We don't have to abandon it, but it is needing a lot of help. And I'll show you how we did that in a minute. I also wanted to identify legal desert swiftly so that when everyone who's really successful meets together, everyone has really limited time. And I didn't want it to be like, well, I worked out of this county and I think this mattered. We can very identify, like, McClellan County has this many attorneys and Hudson County needs help here. And with that, we can then highlight where we can get help at. So what I did is I contacted a variety of people, and I am still to this day getting told, go here, this person has this. But these are some of the collective resources. I need to add the Harris Law Library out of here, but the State Bar, Office of Court Administration, census data, Texas A&M through Dr. Warren, Texas Legal Services Center with Kevin Dietz, Trala with Mary, and our reports to start collecting this data. The State Bar and the OCA definitely have the biggest grouping of this data, but they don't, at least for me, I haven't seen them map it out yet, and you have to email somebody to get it. And so it'd be great if we could see this as a public interfacing situation eventually. Some of the hurdles with these resources, though, to collect this data was, one, everyone kind of sorts the counties differently and their names differently. Also, there's a lot of different data sources. And because there's a lot of different data sources, and Mary has helped me a lot with figuring out how to use a computer to do this, but try to make sure that, all the counties are all in the same places, figure out how people identify or define certain terms, because how one person has defined income is a different way than it's defined in a different place, or household. And so trying to make everybody have the same definition in this database has also been a time challenge. And then because we're getting data from different sources, one thing, for example, today I just learned, and I'll explain later, is I asked the State Bar a year ago, 2 years ago now, and then a year again later, for how many judges are in each county. And, they explained to me, these are the judges. And I said, okay. Today we learned a little bit more about what that meant. So the judges for the State Bar numbers are judges that are attorneys who've now become judges, and they're self-reporting. It's not just an automatic number like the attorney number is, because you have to be registered with the State Bar. But that also changes things, right? Like with the numbers that I'm going to show you with how many attorneys are in each county, just because an attorney shows they're active on the State Bar doesn't mean they're still choosing to practice. Or that they ever practice at all. They've just chosen to still be an active attorney with the State Bar. In court filings, how each county reports their court filings varies dramatically, and that changes the way we see the data as well. So that's a really big hurdle. And then also human error. So also, for example, with my data from the State Bar, when I was looking at it, I realized that these two counties specifically had their data mixed up, and they're two very different counties. And so getting data right that's been touched by so many hands always leads to human error. And so trying to be very aware of that human error and try to fix it is also something that has been a big hurdle. But now let's actually look at the database. So this is my database, and I'll share the link with y'all in the chat later on. But it has many sheets. Each column has its own sheet. And I wanted that so that people could then go see the data by itself and isolated, and also sometimes it's a bit more expanded on. But let's look at the columns themselves so I can show you how I built this database. So first, obviously, it's each county, and I wanted each county to have its own profile in a way, so that we could isolate it and compare it to other counties, or what have you. You can do so much with this data. I then wanted to do population to see counties as people are growing or not growing. And when I built this database, I was only able to really use 2023 data because I was doing it in the middle of 2024. But then in preparation for Poverty Law Council, not Poverty Law Council, sorry, Poverty Law Conference, I was able to update the data with 2024. And that led to a whole new wave of analyzing the data. I also, with 2023 population and income, was able to compare past years, but it's been fun to see what the last 2 years change has been like. So I did population, and then I decided to look at population change, median household income, and how that's changed, and then attorneys. And I hid some of the columns here because there's a lot more, but between G and P, I can expand it real quick. Just don't want to move it. But between G and P, I have the different types of attorneys and attorney concentration, household income. Let's see if I can just quickly do this while I'm in the presentation. There we go. So I can unhide it. Or did it expand already? Anyway, yes, I think I already expanded it. So yes, attorneys 2013, 2022, 2023, and then the attorney change between all those counties, and then 2024 in there. I then wanted to compare the judges, so we got those numbers, and then we got the filings from the Office of the Court Administration. Here, this is 2024. Between all of these and over here, I have 2023 as well. But I just wanted to just show 2024 right now, or else it's already a lot of numbers, it'd be even more. And then I wanted to compare them by region. So we can also organize this data where we just see North Texas or we just see the Hill Country. New data that I'm working on is updating federally qualified health clinics or hospitals. Dr. Warren at A&M is helping me with that. Her and I talked about why we wanted to just focus on federally funded. And the reason for that is when we did this a year ago, federal funding was really reliable. I wouldn't say that as much anymore. So I think we're going to kind of change the way that looks, but those are federally funded clinics. I just recently got numbers from the Harris Law Library, I believe is their full title, and their interns put together how many public libraries and law libraries are in each county. For this presentation, I did map out the law libraries, and I'll show you that in a little bit. And I'm actively working on building a map for all the public libraries, and I'll explain why in a moment. But for each county, or for each column, they have a sheet, and let me show you why. So for example, if somebody wanted to see what the family cases were like in 2023 and they clicked on this part of the sheet, you'll see an even more expansive view as to what the filings were like. And that's what I mean when I say I want this to be a public database, is because I want you to be able to not just see that one main sheet and say, okay, that's what it looks like. It would be great if we could, like this is now, click into it and then really get a much more expansive view. This data is available, and I think it's really important that people be able to access it, because that's how you get money, right? That's how you get advocacy done, is being able to access this quickly. For federally qualified health centers, the places where I have these resources, like where it comes to libraries or colleges, we have their contact information. So this can be used as an advocacy tool. If you're like, hey, you know what? There is a group of people in this rural county near Brazoria County. Where can they go? Well, they can go to this federally qualified hospital, maybe, and we can build a clinic out of it or something. Here's a phone number to call. The way to make advocacy better is to remove barriers and remove the amount of people that you need to contact. So if we have this here, we don't have to call or Google this one place. We already have their address and their phone number. So that's what this is like in each sheet, and I'll invite you to look at it after I send you all the link. The easiest way to get through all the sheets is to click this little button here, and then you can just kind of scroll through. And like I said, each column has their own. So there's one for 2022, 23, 24 sometimes, and 25. So you're welcome to look at it. For example, I just added 2025 Texas Public Libraries. This is data from the Harris Law Library, and I'm gonna put right here, like I literally just put this in today, but up here on the right, on all of the sheets, there is a source. And so up here you'll see right now, I'll put it in later, but I'm going to be putting like this is from so and so at this place with their contact information. So I've also tried to cite all of my sources so it's very clear where that data comes from. So that's the database. Some of the hurdles with organizing all of this data, in addition to what I talked about before, where it comes to resources, is the county reporting varies. So, like I said, each county reports differently, or some don't report at all. For example, emergency protective orders, right? These are done usually through the police department. They're signed by a JP or a justice court or even a district court sometimes. 70 counties say they have zero emergency protective orders. And I know that's not accurate. There's not a single county in Texas where there isn't one person. And I can assure you that there are not 70 counties where there was not a single emergency protective order issued. One, because one of the counties that says they have no EPOs is El Paso County. And I worked and lived in El Paso County as a family law attorney, and I saw plenty of EPOs come across my desk from clients. In regards to protective orders, there's 91 counties that say there's been zero protective order applications, which is also inaccurate. So one of the frustrations with this data is, yeah, it's not going to be entirely accurate. If anything, it's going to be, the reality is going to be maybe a little bit worse or maybe a little better. It's still unclear. The reason, but it's important to identify, right, where we have these shortfalls in the data. The reason why, and I've learned by doing this, that these counties have various data reporting is they all have different resources, right? So some, it's very easy for them to do the data reporting. For others, they don't have the means or the resources to do that. Some don't have the technology for it. If you practice in rural Texas, you'll know that a lot of them still operate like they're in the 80s. So even trying to figure out if somebody's filed an answer, I can't just log on to the Tyler cloud system. I have to call the clerk and the clerk can tell me. And so that, because of that issue, they also don't have a data collection system like Harris County or Travis County. Once again, we have a human error and the margins of error. So when I first looked at this data, right, we can look at the basic data. We can see the attorney amount in each county. We can see the population sizes, the income amounts. We can compare years. But what was really fun about it is starting to break it down. But just the first layer of data to show you guys is there's 8 counties with less than 1,000 people, and that comes up to about 4,000 people. And then we can kind of see how rural Texas is. And if we consider rural to be 5,000 people or less, and like I said, everyone has their own definition of what these words are. So I'm going to try and explain to you what my definitions have been as I've tried to break this data down. Is to me, we can say rural is like 5,000 people or less. There's 54 counties, which is 21.26% of the Texas counties have 5,000 or less, and that's about 132,000 people. There are a lot more people than that in Texas, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that these 132,000 people don't matter just because, you know, that's a percentage of population of people in Houston. These people still matter and they still deserve access to resources. So zero attorneys. This is what the State Bar reports. They report that as of 2024, this is all 2024 data, mind you. These counties have a zero attorney reported working there. Not working there, but registered there. And so what that means is, right, if somebody's practicing this county, that means they're not registered there. That means that these people that live here have to contact an attorney that doesn't probably work out of that county to help them. And these are very rural counties. And so it's not sometimes easy to call somebody or go to an office there. And I'm just going to quickly go through these next slides to show you the basic data of how many attorneys are in each county. So this is the amount of counties with only one attorney, and it's 45,000 people that are affected by this. And Judge Ferguson reported, right, and a lot of this data makes more sense when you have a lived experience person talking about it. He practiced as a judge for all of West Texas, which is right over here. So Culberson, Hudspeth, Reeves, Pecos, Jeff Davis, Presidio, and Brewster, I think were his counties. He said that one of the attorneys, the one attorney that's registered, I think he said in Culberson, doesn't practice. So even though it says there's an attorney there, that does not mean that we can rely on them to actually do the work there. This is the 2, here's the 3, 4, and 5. It quickly grows. So now we're at 273,000 people, 551 people. So this is a very large amount of Texas that has 0 to 5 attorneys helping in these areas, and not helping, but like practicing actively. There's people obviously trying to maybe go work remotely, travel in there. I drive through Midland County, Glasscock County, Sterling County, and I see 3 or 4 billboards of the same attorney advertising his services there. But they definitely have access to far less attorneys than somebody in Fort Bend or Brazoria. And so what that means is these attorneys are also going to have barriers to practicing there. A lot of judges are not open to remote proceedings anymore, and so people are having to drive 2 to 3 hours to do a 5 minute conference to go do a little hearing. And a lot of attorneys don't want to spend that money, or people can't pay their attorney to spend the time to do that, and so they're already having trouble accessing attorneys in that way. Um, and I'll talk a little bit about income in a minute. But this is the data regarding where there's counties that have 5 attorneys or less. So using my data, I was able to see, that's 68 counties. There's 250, I think, 2 counties in Texas. And there's a total of 165 registered attorneys in these counties. But that impacts a significant more amount of people. In terms of data filing, I try to think, let's look at how many filings were actually done. There is obviously active activity in these courts. And once again, these are rural counties. So the filing number is probably much higher, but we don't have access to that data because they're probably not actually even reporting that data. But it's almost 9,500 civil case filings just in these counties alone, where I'm sure there's more than 165 total attorneys practicing, but that's what's registered there. So in terms of judges, now the judge data, like I said today, I learned is very interesting. So the state bar reports that there are 0 judges in these counties. But what I've learned today is that does not include like justices of the peace. People that are judges but are not registered attorneys do not get considered in the state bar's collection of judge data, which I think is interesting because they have judicial power in some way. And so, fun fact for you if you're using state bar data. I emailed the Office of Court Administration today because the state bar told me that's who I could go to for that information. So I'm waiting on them to send me that data, and I'll update the spreadsheet in any future presentations after that in my maps. But this is the data I have right now. And so the state bar is reporting that 42% of Texas counties don't have a judge. They might have a justice of the peace. They might have some other kind of judge, but this is what they said is the reported judge number. There's judge activity, but like, for example, for Judge Ferguson, when he was presiding over West Texas, his registered county, I believe, was Brewster County. So he had to travel to Presidio, to Jeff Davis, to Culberson, and to Hudspeth. And Judge Ferguson was a very big judge on remote proceedings because not only did he have to drive 5 hours to get to Hudspeth, but so did his attorneys that were practicing in front of him. There's a new judge there, and he at first apparently ran on not really doing remote proceedings anymore, and then now in practice is starting to implement remote proceedings again. But for example, the Marfa courtroom that most people have to practice out of in these counties is not a great courtroom to practice remotely in. When Judge Ferguson was the judge there, he set up the entire remote courtroom, is my understanding. And then when he left, it was kind of taken apart. And now there's no remote capabilities there. The clerk there, she's incredible. Or the court coordinator, sorry, she's incredible. When I've practiced remotely into Marfa, had to set up all the laptops, and I had to have my ear pressed against the speaker to try to hear what was going on there. So practicing remotely in these counties is really difficult. The judges have to travel or also preside remotely, and it's really difficult. And so the counties where the state bar reports there's 0 attorneys and 0 judges are these here up in the Panhandle. It's almost 20,000 people. And this is the civil case filing data. Like I've said, this data cannot be 100% complete because there's reporting issues everywhere. And that's something I talk about later on about how we can try to make this data better so that we can better these people's lives. But this is what we have in front of us right now. Now, in regards to judges, once again, this is where they say that there's 1 judge. So these 1 judges are trying to go travel into these other counties to preside and do what work needs to be done there. Now, I was also able to do racial demographics for the legal deserts, which is something that Judge Ferguson and I talked about because the people that make decisions at the Texas Access to Justice Commission, on the Supreme Court, don't always reflect the demographic makeup of these counties. And something that's really important, I grew up doing organizing in El Paso, is you need to grow up in the community, you need to break bread with the community to be able to understand the community, and to make changes in communities, you need to sit down with people from them. And a lot of the issues that, or a lot of the initiatives, sorry, that come out of Austin or wherever to try to help these communities don't really work within the community because they don't understand them. And so that's an important issue that we can use the data for as well. Um, Now, analyzing the data a little bit in even more detail was able to show me, my definition of what is legal desert, which I'll talk about in a minute. I was able to answer the question, is it just low income people who need help? And if not, what do we need to do about that? And also who can help? So, how did I or Judge Ferguson and I define legal desert? So, first, do we want to do it off attorney amount, population, attorney concentration? What I proposed just for comparing this data right now is places where it's a population or counties where it's less than 5,000 people, plus the attorney amount had to be five or less, and the attorney concentration had to be less than 1% of the population. And I thought that last part was really important because, it could be a county where there's 100 people and one attorney, and there could be a county where there's 500 people and one attorney. And so I really wanted to try to identify the counties to the most restrictive amount possible. The good news is I didn't use judges, and so the skewed judge data doesn't even impact this. And so this is the numbers I came up with. Even with this very restrictive equation, there's still 25 counties that are identified. And so for the next few slides where I am kind of showing you other data and maps I've collected to where we can help, I'm going to use this map. But if you were to use this data, I invite you to come up with your definition of what you think a legal desert is, and then see what you can do with that data. That's the beauty of having this large database, is we can make our own definitions. We can figure out what we want it to look like, and restrict it in whatever way we want. But these are the counties, and it's almost 70, it's a little over 73,000 people that are impacted by this very restrictive definition. And so to answer the question, though, of if legal deserts are not always the poorest counties, they're not. So if you look here, the median household income for some of these counties where there's very few attorneys is it's very scattered, right? There's some where there's very low, but there's some where there's very high. And so what that can mean is these median places like Sterling County, where the median household income is about $79,000 a year. That might knock some households out of Trala or Landwid's help, but those people still might not have the resources to pay for a private attorney. And so there are, even down in the yellows and the oranges where we're at 61,000, 58,000, those households might get kicked out of our possibility to help because the income's a little too high, but they can't afford to pay for an attorney to come from, a big city to come help them, because then they have to pay for travel costs and they have to pay plus their hourly wage. And so it's not just a legal aid problem. It's not just a nonprofit problem. This is a problem that all of Texas needs to get behind to help, both private and public. So something else that we can use the data to look at is internet. And so one thing I thought about, the remote proceedings is like, can that even happen? So usually to do remote proceedings, it probably needs to be between 25, 40, and 100 Mbps. And so I was curious to see what maps there were available for that. And thankfully, there are a lot of online maps. So this is as of 2022. I retrieved it today. Mary helped me out with this new updated map because I was using a little bit of an older one. But this shows you where there's underserved areas in the red. There's red and orange, and then there's blue. And so, Texas, as we know, is a very rural area. And so there's a lot of places where there's not much Wi-Fi or it's very underserved. And so I wanted to compare this to our legal desert map. Something that's interesting, and I'm going to compare this to you. I'll show you guys, you'll see this later. Just keep the idea of this map, the one on the left, in your hand, because I also talk about life expectancy later on. East Texas obviously is underserved as well, and it is very rural. It didn't fit into the restrictive definition I had of legal desert, but there's a ton of legal deserts out there as well if we expand the definition. But West Texas is so rural that they don't even really have a lot of data for that. So if you're living in Pecos County and you're living in this, the south part of it, you don't really have a lot of access to internet. If you're in Brewster down here, and of course a lot of this is Big Bend, but there's people that live in Terralingua, and I have a client, for example, who lives in Terralingua, and she needed to go to the courthouse. The courthouse isn't in Terralingua, it's in Marfa. That's a 2-hour drive north, and she's 80 years old. So there's a lot of issues with if people want to, appear remotely, they might not be able to from their house because they might not even have the internet to do it. And that's why I thought about public libraries or universities or, health centers as a resource because then people can try to appear remotely in those areas. But this is just something that we could use the data to compare against. Something else is, oops, excuse me, it's going a little slow. There we go. Something else, though, that I learned by doing this at Poverty Law Conference was I learned about Bluebonnet Fiber. So if you are practicing in a rural area or you have clients practicing in a rural area and they want access to internet and AT&T doesn't serve out there, Spectrum doesn't, or they want to use a smaller person for internet, Bluebonnet Fiber is a newer initiative. It's a very small little company. It's these 5 people. It says beneath the team. They're the ones that are running it. Um, and they're doing fiber in rural Texas. And so this is something fun to be able to spread to these communities. And we can use the data to identify what counties might need to know about Bluebonnet Fiber. So anyway, not sponsored, but just thought it was a cool thing and something I learned about by doing this presentation so often now. Something else is the community college taxing district. So these are where there's community colleges throughout the state of Texas. And like I said, those could be a resource. So we can use this map to say, oh, in Hudspeth and Culberson, we can try to use El Paso Community College. In McKinney, we can go into Real, Uvalde, or Zavala for help. Jim Haw can go down to Hidalgo. So we can identify where we can try to get people to help, where a remote attorney can come in and hold a clinic, where legal aid can go hold a clinic, where people can have a room for remote proceedings that's funded by the state bar. There's places that we can already use. We don't have to build from the ground up, but we need to be able to know where those resources are and what counties actually need the help with it. Now, in terms of law libraries, I just did this map today. This is the counties where there's a law library. There's 36 law libraries in the state of Texas. I've learned that the way that you get a law library is the funding for them usually comes from the money made from the filings in a county. And so some counties, a lot of counties, where they don't have enough money because of the less amount of filings, they can't make a law library. So these are the law libraries, and then it's a bit rough, but I overlaid the legal deserts, my definition of legal desert, and where they can go for help, right? So Culberson and Hudspeth have to go to the El Paso Law Library if they want a law library. McKinney doesn't have one nearby it. Neither does Sherman or Oldham up here in the Panhandle or Wheeler. So this is just an example of where there is a significant lack of resources for a lot of these communities. But the next step of this project is mapping out public libraries because public libraries are also a great resource for these folks. And there's significantly more public libraries than there are law libraries. Now, in regards to ways we can also help these places, Dr. Warren and I talked about tapping into medical legal partnership monies and medical partnership monies because there's a lot of money and research going into how the lack of access to justice can also really impact your life expectancy and your health. So I pulled up this map today. It's the life expectancy map. And so this is kind of what I was talking about, where I said East Texas is very rural, obviously, and they have a much lower life expectancy than far West Texas, which I thought was fascinating. And I would really like to learn more about that and why that is. But I once again compared it to not the legal desert map, but the attorney map, because the way I was seeing it kind of like access to attorneys. But anyway, I thought this was super fascinating as well. And a way to compare our data to readily available data to try to make some big changes. And so I'm expanding and learning a little bit more about tapping into medical money to try to get resources to help these communities. But this is a great example of that. Now, other local partnerships, right? Like I talked about, local health clinics, universities, public libraries, doing medical legal partnerships out of these areas, and remote access portals are great ways to try to help these communities and use this data to do that. But we need more data, and we need it to determine for those who can afford private counsel, are remote proceedings able to happen? Are they happening? Are they happening well, right? Or are we having to press our head against a speaker? Can private attorneys advertise in these areas? Can they meet with clients remotely? Or are they interested in going in person? For those who cannot afford private counsel, is legal aid out there? How much is legal aid doing? Is pro bono representation available? I will say that at Poverty Law Conference, there was a lot of big law pro bono representation there, and they all reached out to me after to say, like, what else can we do? How can we help? So I will say that at least in big law, there is an interest. I've been warned that sometimes with that, there's a lot of training involved, but I think it's something definitely worth exploring. And for both, can courts hold remote hearings remotely? Can clients participate? Do people know who to call? Do people know who to call privately or publicly? And who else can help? Now, what can we do? So, for data driven decision making, we need to prioritize data collection. There needs to be money funded into these communities so that they will report this data and can. I don't know if it needs to be as extreme as mandating it, but that's an idea, right? Is they're already mandating judges. There's a new, I guess, law. I think it's a law that was passed or a House bill. I'm not sure which one Judge Ferguson defined it as, but there is a law now, a requirement for judges to close out cases, and they're going to be watched a lot more to make sure they're closing out their cases. So we can do that to judges. Can we do that to clerks? Can we require clerks to actually report this data to press? Yes, this case is closed. Yes, there was a filing. Yes, there was an emergency protective order. Because the other thing is, if we prioritize data collection, there's more resources going to be available because we can actually use data to show that places need more money and need more help. We need to increase the funding. We need to upgrade these systems to improve and simplify reporting. I don't understand why there's not a uniform Tyler system for all the counties. I guess, the counties have to pay into it, but it could be a statewide initiative where, regardless of what size your county is, you all get access to the same system for reporting and filing. It would make attorneys' lives a lot easier too. And we just need to increase transparency and public reporting. This data should not have to take me to go through the state bar, to go through the Office of Court Administration, to talk to one person here to get this data. It should be readily available and able to access. And we need to improve the training of court and clerk staff to know why it's important to report this data and share this data. So the future of this data can be using the law libraries, asset mapping. I want to asset map this so bad. I did asset mapping in undergrad, and I think it's such a great tool, so that you can click into Culberson County and see where there's the law firm, see where there's a university, a library, and a hospital. We need to profile each county and sit down with each county to figure out where the resources are, who's going to be a community justice worker there, who are key players, who are the judges, who are the funders, who are the mayors, and etc. For example, there's a storage medical container in Terralingua. So it's a storage container in Terralingua. A nurse is operating outside of that and then remotely bringing in a doctor to treat people. Judge Ferguson has talked about it. One of my friends has talked about it. And it's incredibly efficient and the community loves it. So identifying examples of that in each county and trying to turn that into a lawyer field is how we make an actual change. We also need to compare what has worked and why. So the Pasadena kiosk is apparently the most used kiosk in the state of Texas, and I would love to learn why. What about it makes it so well used, and also the success of the law pods and what those are looking like. And we need to identify what counties want more trainings. We can get an access with the Texas Clerks Association, and we need to tap into MLP money. So the National Center for State Court Mapping has done an example of what I would love to see. They don't have one for Texas. They have one for New Mexico. Let's see if it'll load. So yeah, so they have them for Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, etc. So like if you were to click on Arizona, it would, and I don't know how fast my computer is gonna be able to do this. There you go. So it already has a lot of layers. It has GIS mapping, which is the asset mapping, which I think is incredible. And so this is what I would love to see our data look like. It's going really slow because my computer has a lot going on right now, but I encourage you to look at this and I'll share this presentation after so you guys can see it. But it already has a mapping of this data very similar to what I've collected. So anyway, I now leave it open to questions. Mary had said that we like to leave time for everyone to talk, and so I wanted to just kind of rush this to show you guys, but this is my contact info. I would love to hear feedback and talk with y'all about your thoughts on this. Or if there's any questions also, obviously I welcome that too.
This is so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about asset mapping in our work too, and yeah, using different tools to get there. And apologies if you already answered this in that
Yeah.
particular slide. How did you choose 5,000 as the cutoff size for a legal desert?
I mean, honestly, when I was just kind of putting this together, that's something that pops in my head because I was looking at So what I did is I looked at the county data, and it's going to take a long time because my computer's running slow. I organized the counties based on population size, and was kind of looking at like where there was a lot of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, and 5,000. Honestly, it just felt like the right number. Wish I could give you a more scientific reason. I probably should use a more scientific reason for that, but it felt like a right number. Because it felt like 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, like then it kind of rounds up to 10,000. So just 5,000 or less, five or less felt like a good number in my head, but I should use a more data driven number for that now that I have more data. But do you guys have a recommendation on a better number? That's, I mean, yeah, very sure that y'all are very data folks, and so I would love to know if you guys are like, you guys, this is a better definition for this, or this is a better equation, because then I can update this presentation and my data for that.
I mean, this is just my thought, but I felt like your definition of the ratio of lawyers to individuals was really key.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that was for me a really strong driver. That, and then also thinking about like the size of some of these counties is interesting.
Yeah.
Where you've got some really big ones and some smaller ones. So like even though someone might be in a county that has more attorneys, they might be like concentrated in a certain part of the state. So I'm
That's
wondering, and I don't know how granular you can get in terms of like distant, like location of attorneys
yeah.
and
No, that's
like,
a great thought. I
you
like that a
know,
lot. Mhm.
dispersal of attorneys. Like, I don't know if dispersal of attorney is a thing that you can calculate where you're like,
Yeah.
all
No, but
right,
that is really fascinating,
yeah.
and I think that like for example, going down from like 256 counties to 25 counties here, right? That's not as overwhelming, right? To go to Hudspeth and say, well, where are the people? Because you're right, especially like in Brewster County, where half of it is Big Bend. Where are the people? And I think that's a really a good thought. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and Big Bend is our national park in Texas for those who may not know. It's beautiful. Highly recommend.
And Kevin's here on the call. Kevin has been a great resource and help for this. So hi, Kevin. Big shout out to you. Actually, I have a thank you page. Kevin's on it, and so is Mary. But yeah, all these people have been essential to getting this data, so big helps to them. I don't know. One thing, Mary, and if anyone has a thought on it, is the definition of dying counties or critical care counties. Do any of you have a thought on that phrase?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of gets into like the language that we're using to describe the communities that we're working with and we're trying to serve. Because something Eden and I had been talking about is I think there's a lot of discussions around not wanting to portray communities as being helpless. Like they're very resilient and they are doing a lot with the resources that they do have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just because the community is under resourced doesn't mean there's not kind of a lot going on there, and just being really thoughtful that when we're kind of pointing out under resourced areas, we're not using language that kind of disempowers them
Exactly.
or almost makes it seem like, oh, well, there's nothing going on there when there's
Mm-hmm.
really, really so much.
Yeah. No, and I thought it was a great way to point it out. Well, let me share the link so y'all have it in the chat and you can save it if you'd like to explore. I'm working on writing out a like start here page. Just have not had a chance to do that yet, but the main page is pretty explanatory.
Jess, please go ahead. Yeah, I see you raise your hand.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Eden, for your presentation. Love being able to look at maps in that way. And one question I had, um, it was a question because of a question you said of where are the people? So I was interested to know how you all found a way to leverage the population data that you're looking at in a way to maybe drive metrics towards outreach, or are there other teams that other audiences that are using what you all are finding to further inform their work. It's something we've been talking about. I'm at Maryland Legal Aid a lot in leveraging some of our data to help point our outreach teams to maybe where aren't we and where should we be based on what we're finding in these map summaries. So I also have a thought just to share on your question about definitions, but would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question with the outreach and population. So I think that this data is still not really being used a ton yet. And so I think that in terms of, for me, I'm sitting at the table where there's talks about the community justice workers and building that program. And so I'm really hoping that when we start talking about who we're going to reach out to for community justice workers and outreach in that way, we can use this data to do that. And I think now that, Sarah gave me the idea about the area size of each county and the disbursement of people, I really want to kind of focus in on that because I think that that then goes to your outreach, right? Is if we can see where the disbursement of people is in Hudspeth or in Floyd or Hall, where these tiny counties are very rural, but if they are all like in one spot, or we can actually do maybe like a heat map. We can use that to do outreach and actually make a use of it. If there's a majority of people in Pecos in one spot, that's where we can do a clinic, and then we can figure out what the library is there, the university is there. So I think that's how you could leverage that data, and something that I definitely think we'll use in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the next step there, sorry, go ahead,
Oh no,
Eden.
please.
We could also break this down by the census tract level for population. Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. What was your thought on the definition?
Yeah, so we recently just completed a workshop around data equity, and one of the things that came out of that was thinking about like the purpose for the data collection in the definition when thinking about the definition. So I was just pulling up my notes from that conversation or that workshop we had. So that was one of the takeaways I had in refining the definition. And then also could think about ultimately who's the ultimate audience, maybe even, so that you all aren't necessarily limited to that definition based on one like having that singular meaning, especially for the exploration and analysis aspect of your work. So just wanted to share that if that could be a thought and helpful as you're thinking, because it sparked for me when we were doing that workshop and taking that approach that hopefully that can be helpful to think about.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the reason I had said like dying or critical care is and I guess I need to put an asterisk there, that would be important, is the reason I said that was it's the counties where the attorneys are not practicing anymore, or where the attorneys are literally like retiring or dying there, and there aren't new attorneys going. And so that's why I had said that, right? And so that's kind of, and I said dying in that way because it feels in that way like it is that dire critical condition. But Mary, you make a great point about there's a lot going on there. So we don't want to make it seem like the county, if you're just reading it like, oh, the county's dying without any context, that makes a lot of sense. It does take away the power from the people there, and thinking about who the audience is going to be to read that. So it's super helpful.
I had one question for you, Eden. I loved when you mentioned kind of the importance of using all this data, but at the same time being in really close communication and collaboration with the people in these counties.
Yeah.
And I was just curious if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, especially as like a practitioner who grew up in rural Texas and like practiced there, and kind of how you see that sort of marriage with this work.
Yeah, so I think that I think a lot of, and I'm so sorry to anybody that I might offend by what I say here. I think a lot of times, like with nonprofits, there's always sometimes a language of like, we're doing the work here. And I'm like, but you don't have an office there. What do you mean? Like, you're not actually breaking bread there. I remember like I was approached by an organization when I was in law school, like, hey, do you want to come work here? And I was like, well, do you have it was an immigration organization. And they said, come work for us. And I said, well, do you have an office in El Paso? And they were like, no. And I'm like, do you have an office on the border? And they were like, no. And I was like, so no, I'm good. Thank you. Like, you say you're doing work on the border, but you're not. And if you are, you're doing it remotely. Like, actually come to the border, like build an office there, come to the coffee shops, go see what's going on when ICE dumps people in downtown. And Las Americas and El Paso is actually having to clean up clean up and help and serve these people. And so I think that's something that I just have seen happen a lot, is a lot of places will say, we're doing the work there, we're helping out, but they're not actually there every day feeling the burden and the pain of it. As a person who grew up in El Paso and wants to keep doing the work in El Paso, I even have my own qualms about moving away. I moved away because my partner has a great job opportunity out here, and I'm going to be able to do a lot of great work out here. But it's going to be a lot harder for me to say I'm helping in El Paso when I'm, hours and hours away and not feeling the weight of the current things happening there. And so that's why I think it's really important to be in the place that you're saying you're going to do the work and you want to do the work, practicing rurally and practicing remotely rurally. I get to say I'm doing that, but I don't get to say I'm working in Marfa because I'm not. So I think it's just really important to talk to people that are on the ground, seeing the everyday issues, and also understanding that Texas is huge. And so the way El Paso, which is a border city, is going to do something very different than a city in Hidalgo or Zapata, because it's a completely different area of Texas and the border, and has a completely different influx of culture from Mexico, because it's a very different region of Mexico. And so I think that even understanding that saying you're doing something on one part of the border does not mean you can walk into a different part and say, like, I know what we're doing here, people. And I can't go up to Sherman, which is the panhandle in a completely different place, and tell them that what's going to work there is what's going to work in Brazoria or in Harris. So, and in Bowie or Castle, it's just, I think that we have to understand that each county is going to be really different in the way they do things. Each neighborhood is going to be different. And so that's what I think is the beauty of the community justice worker program as well, is it's people from the community who work in the community who are going to be able to help these people. Because also working in legal aid, I grew up, right, I said I grew up low income. One other thing is, a lot of times people don't trust you if you're not like them. And so a joke I make a lot, people laugh about it, I think it's funny, is like I have a lot of tattoos, right? And a lot of my clients also have tattoos. And I say that my tattoos are a business expense. But it does. I mean, the minute I take off my suit coat, my clients immediately like warm up and they're like, oh my God, I love your tattoos. And now we can have a really organic conversation. And so I think just that little tidbit though then goes into doing advocacy work. Because if you're like, I am like you are like me, we can work together. If you're from that community, you're going to work better with people in that community. And so that's what I kind of mean by that.
Thank you. I know we've kind of talked a lot about Texas because this is very
Yes.
much where Eden is and kind of where this project is centered. But I'm curious, for folks kind of calling in from other states, do you see some of these patterns in your own states? Is this kind of generating ideas for other places?
Yeah, this is very much, I think, related to a project I'm working on with WashU, where we're looking at use of this tool called Ladder that was designed to help people work together to identify kind of like resources and also areas where like they have census data that you can see on a census tract and zip code level. And so you can see like, oh, these are places where people are more uninsured. And so I can actually map like where are our, Medicaid cases, and are there spots where there's like a higher population that's uninsured where we don't have a lot of cases? And if so, like what can our outreaches look like there? And so that's something I'm really excited about, and seeing the kind of work that you're doing here and like the factors you're looking into are giving really good ideas on how to like build out our collaborative data sets on Ladder, while ensuring that we don't have any client information in there. But
Right.
like if we're mapping assets, how can we share that with like people who are doing housing work and people who are doing healthcare work in St. Louis? And so it's a really fun, like it's, available to anyone in the United States, like for specific census data and zip code data in the United States. So I just wanted to plug that and say like it's really cool that you're doing this work.
Thanks. I actually was gonna put in a map that I found today on uninsured folks in Texas and compare that to legal deserts as well. And so I think that's a really cool idea to think about, is like, if you're uninsured, how are you gonna have Medicaid? How do we get to you for that outreach? And so the outreach portion of this is something I hadn't fully thought about yet either. So this is very helpful for me, the outreach you guys have talked about.
Awesome. Any last thoughts, questions, comments? I know we're almost at time, and I know y'all are very busy folks.
Well, thank you all so much. If you would like to talk more or anything comes up in the future, this is my number. You can text it or call it, and this is my email. So let me know. I would love to keep in contact with y'all if you have any thoughts or questions or want to collaborate on anything.
To see Sarah's comment in the chat, since we've already been on a Texas theme today, ITC in San Antonio, we will have some folks from Charlotte going. Yeah, are a lot of folks on this call going? Can feel free to chat. I think we are planning probably to do a meetup for this group. I think last year we did like an informal lunch, but if folks are interested, you could definitely do something like that again. Okay, cool. Well, definitely if y'all would like to kind of have this lovely end to the year, our December meeting will be on the 11th. Not recorded, time to just share your projects, what you've been working on, and what you'd like to see for the new year. So thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mary.